Okay, so today is Software Engineering in Finance Day, celebrating the International Women in Engineering Day. And I'm proud to introduce our first speaker, Sofia Blee, who is a software engineer in the storage team at Goldman Sachs, but who also runs an internal meetup group about software craftsmanship. And this group has grown to over 400 members at the moment. And Sofia has kindly agreed to share some of her wisdoms with us today.
Thanks, Helen. Let me just go ahead and share my screen. Okay, so yes, as Helen said, I'm Sofia Blee, and today I'm going to be talking about software craft and the kind of benefits that it can bring for your clients and your developers. Um, so very quickly, just going over the goals of the presentation. By the end, you should be able to sort of understand what software craft is, how these practices can result in outcomes that are beneficial to your team. I'm going to outline some actions that you can take to take some of these practices back to your team, and also some actions that you can take if you're interested in learning more about software craft. Okay, so what is software craft to begin with? So the software craft movement draws a lot of characteristics that are similar to those of general craftspeople. For example, like a carpenter is a craftsman. So these characteristics are a dedication to quality and continuous improvement, a desire to sort of become a master of your craft, um, having a passion for what you're creating and being proud of it. Striving firstly to do the right thing, so building to the correct specifications, but also to do the thing right, so being mindful of the way that you're building it and focusing on quality. And finally, a culture of learning and mentorship. So when we take these characteristics and apply them to software engineering, what does the culture look like? So we aim to promote technical excellence, having a team that strive towards the same goal of writing high quality code. Accountability. We take accountability for what we do, being invested in what we are producing and taking care how we do it. If we feel accountable, then we produce a better product for our clients. In the finance industry especially, there are many rules, regulations and auditing that we must be cognizant of, so accountability is especially important. Empowerment, so feeling empowered to do the right thing. Feeling empowered means having the knowledge and the confidence that you're making the correct decisions, both in design and implementation. Knowing why you are doing something is key to making informed decisions and feeling empowered. We have a belief that when we focus on quality, it results in long-term benefits. So some benefits of increasing quality are fewer production bugs, implementing changes quicker and easier, and an increase in team morale. And finally, we grow by mentoring, sharing and learning. If we aim to continually learn and improve ourselves, our quality will follow. And if we foster that culture in our teams, we can all learn and grow from each other. I just wanted to make a note on pragmatism regarding software craft. So software craft isn't the aim to be perfect. As craftspeople, we need to be pragmatic and commercial. So we shouldn't be spending a significant amount of time trying to write non-trivial code that satisfies the very final, small, rare use cases. Instead, we should be releasing the minimum viable product and iterating, releasing incremental improvements regularly. We should also be asking why. So by asking why we are doing something, we're able to get a good understanding of the bigger picture and prioritize accordingly. So now that we have an understanding about what software craft actually is, I wanted to share a case study on what happened to my team at Goldman Sachs when we started to apply these practices. Code coverage. We increased our number of unit tests and we're able to increase our cut line and branch coverage from 10% to over 95%. We published our code coverage numbers into SonarQube, and using the Sonar API, we queried the code coverage and enforced a rule in our build that said the code coverage can't drop in percentage. So this encouraged our team to keep this high standard when writing tests and writing code that was more testable as a result. So if they write some code and it's not covered by a test, the build will break. They'll get notified, they can go back and fix it. If they can't test it, they're encouraged to write it in a more testable way. Bugs. So we were able to reduce the number of bugs that were released into production by catching them earlier in the release process. We wrote our own static analysis tool called Code Quality Analyzer, or CQA. CQA checks for many different things that we would consider bad quality. For example, we look for tests that have no assertions or tests with bad assertions, such as assert true is true. CQA runs in JUnit, so we can catch these types of issues in the IDE. We also use ErrorProne, which is a Gradle plugin, so we run it in our build. It's another static analysis tool that checks for common bugs, and we use it to break our build if we find violations. Next, we have code review culture. Previously, we didn't really have a code review culture, but now we consider code reviews essential. And the way that we went about doing this was writing our own tool to allocate code reviews. So it runs every morning, and it takes all the new tickets that are in review and assigns them to 4 members of the team. And we also have a call every week to discuss any follow-ups that someone might have raised against a ticket. So by using some of the practices mentioned earlier, using sort of static analysis and detecting bugs, it means that our developers spend less time looking for simple mistakes, and we can focus on just reviewing the actual functional parts of the code. Lines of code. We removed a lot of unused and duplicate code from our code base. We reduced it from around 400,000 lines of code to 60,000. So removing unused and duplicate code makes it easier to maintain your code base. We used static analysis tools again to identify unused methods and locate where some code may have been copied and pasted and might be a candidate for consolidation. We also annotated our REST endpoints with @timed. So this annotation collects metrics on how many times your endpoint was called and how long your calls take. But as a result, if you can see the count, you can see what endpoints are not getting called at all. And over time, you can see, what endpoints are never getting called, and you can delete them. So release count and cost. So how frequently we're releasing and how much effort each release requires. We aim for continuous delivery by releasing as frequently as possible. We have a mantra in my team, the 6 R's. So that's regular releases reduces risk and raises reputation. So by releasing in small regular increments, the risk of introducing issues to your prod environment is smaller, and this raises your reputation with your users. We also try to automate our releases as much as we can. For example, we created a deployment script that will deploy our processes instead of having someone execute multiple commands manually. By automating this as well, this reduces the risk of incidents and means that our developers spend less time doing repetitive tasks. Release confidence. So this is the confidence and comfortableness that we have making changes and then releasing them. And the way that we gained confidence was by doing many different types of testing. Firstly, we started with unit tests, so increasing our code coverage, making sure that we have high line and branch coverage. We also started doing scenario testing. So this is where we test our end-to-end flows to make sure that our components are interacting with each other as expected while mocking our external resources. We use Fitness to do this, but there are other tools out there. We also started writing automated integration tests. So this is testing our code against real external resources. So it's different to scenario because it's going to be using real payloads. So if your payloads are different by accident and you only have scenario tests, you don't do integration tests, you won't catch that. So that's why we have both mocking and real integration tests. And finally, perhaps an interesting one, we started mutation testing. So this actually tests the quality of your tests, your unit tests. So it changes the bytecode. So for example, if you have a method that has a if statement that has an equals comparison, it'll change that to a not equals and then rerun your test. If your test still passes after it's changed, equals to a not equals, then your test isn't doing the correct assertions, and it needs to be rewritten or changed basically, and that will fail your mutation test. So overall, we've observed many benefits from introducing these kinds of practices in my team. We're able to release much more frequently, meaning that we're delivering features to our clients at a higher velocity. We're not apprehensive about making changes to our code because we test very thoroughly. We've started a culture of raising the bar, so the team feels encouraged to leave code cleaner than they found it, and we have these automated tools that help us enforce and maintain this high standard. But overall, I think the two main benefits that we've noticed is that we have a happy team because our developers are able to spend more time writing functional code, and we have happier users because we're delivering features at a quicker pace with fewer bugs. So now that we understand what software craft is, how do I take this back to my team? How do I implement it? We've already talked about static analysis tools, code views, different types of testing, and I think I've kind of skimmed over using the build, but I want to make the point that the build can be an invaluable tool. You can break the build on code coverage drops, static analysis bug finds, bad tests, bad logging. You can, there's many more things that you could use it for, and it's a good way to automatically enforce a higher quality standard. But finally, and perhaps most importantly, the whole team should be focused on making quality a deliverable. Start by talking to your team and brainstorm some ideas that you have that you can use to increase quality, increase your release confidence, and overall create a better product for your users. So if you're interested in learning more about software craft, the software craftsmanship community they organise meetups, they organise lightning talks, conferences, roundtables, and at Goldman Sachs we've also organised collaboration meetups with the London software craftsmanship community in 2018 and 2019. We are interested in organising more. We'd like to do a internal external event, but COVID restrictions don't allow for that right now, so keep your eyes peeled if you are interested. So finally, if there's one thing I want you to take away from this presentation, it's just to start a discussion with your team on quality, work out how you can improve your product using some of the practices I mentioned, and go from there. Thank you. I don't know, we have a few minutes if anyone has any questions.
What was the 6 R's again? Regular releases, raises,
Regular
reputation,
reduces risk and raises reputation.
reduces risk. Thank you.
Sophia, how have you found it when you have new members of your team joining, either, from other, coming as lateral hires or even new joiners coming out of uni? Like, how have you seen them adapt to this team culture and approach?
Pretty well, actually. I find that, it's not. I've not experienced anyone that has an attitude that thinks that we shouldn't be doing these kinds of things. Most people seem pretty on board. Regular reduces risk and raises reputation. Yes. Just looking at the chat.
I feel it's missing also IMH and improves mental health, because nothing contributes to a healthy team as confidence in your software.
Yeah.
You don't have to rush somewhere on Friday evening or on the weekend.
Yeah,
Do we
it's
have
nice.
any more? Yeah.
Oh, sorry, I was just gonna say it's nice to have confidence in what you're releasing and not be worried every time you push some code out.
Yeah. Absolutely. I know. Do you have any more questions?
Static code analysis tools. We use error-prone. We also built our own. As I mentioned, we called it Code Quality Analyzer. We also use SEML. No problem.
I guess these are all the questions we have. I think it would be okay if you remember something, just drop something in the chat, your question in the chat, and we can get back to it later after the second presentation. Or maybe we can answer some of them in writing. Thank you very much, Sophia. It's been very encouraging and very, healthy. And I am happy to introduce our next speakers, Fionn Ackland and Bik-Marie Nelke. Fionn is a co-head of the Global Markets Data Models and Governance team at Goldman Sachs. She's tasked with defining, building, governing the internal data models for derivatives products. Big is a vice president in the Goldman Sachs data engineering department, and both of them work on the firm's proprietary data management software called Legend, which has been recently outsourced. So they help to promote this software and make it of use to the wider financial community. Thank you.
Thanks, Helen. So just while Beaker pulls up our slides.
Let me start my screen share in a second. All right, hope everyone can see that.
So yeah, thank you for joining us today. As Helen mentioned, we're going to take you through Legend, which is a piece of software that was created and developed within GS, but is now open source, such that any of you could actually go and have a play. And later on, we are going to give you a demo, and we would love that to be interactive. So please get ready with some ideas. We will share some more a little bit later on. But given Helen has already introduced us both, I will hand over to Beaker to kick us off on sort of what Legend is and how we went through that open source journey.
Yes, let me do that in a second. Just struggling with some screen sharing. think I got it. Awesome. Thanks, Fee. And yeah, very excited to be here today with all of you and talk about Legend. Yeah, I'm Vika, Vice President in the data engineering team, and I'm currently focusing on yeah, managing the program to open source Legend. So what we will be talking today with you about is our journey to open source Legend, and also how we already transformed the industry collaboration just shortly after we open sourced the software. So yeah, and it's actually pretty exciting for Fia and I to be here and talk about the Legend project, because open sourcing is actually fairly challenging to do in the financial industry. So yeah, for us to be here, talk about it, and then yeah, really talk about the success story that we had with it is really a privilege, and we are super happy about it. So what we will do is giving you a brief overview of what Legend is, then the journey of open sourcing it, some reasons behind why we open sourced it, and then something fairly unique and special about the Legend project is actually that we not only open source the code, but also partnered with a nonprofit organization called Finos that is hosting a Legend application free for everyone to use. And that opened up some pretty interesting industry use cases that Fee will walk you through. And then lastly, we will close the presentation with a little Legend demo. Awesome. So yeah, let's get started with a brief overview of what Legend is. So we already briefly mentioned that, but Legend is an open source data management platform, and it already has kind of significant adoption and impact in the industry. Just after its launch about a year ago. And the reason we believe this is the case is that the financial industry in particular really is impressing me to find solutions for various data challenges. Just to name a few, this is the explosion of raw information, data silos, data duplication, data quality issues that need to be addressed. And yeah, with Legend, we aim to provide a holistic solution that addresses all these data challenges by providing accurate, timely, and safe access to data. So when you guys have a look at this diagram here, you can probably spot that it's the Legend platform is actually comprised of multiple different front and back end components. Because we're speaking of a data management platform, it all starts with the raw data that is stored in various different data sources that can be on-prem or in the cloud. And with our Legend component Cube, we allow users to actually connect to these raw data tables and create some queries on top of the data, drag and drop style, and also apply some Excel-like data manipulations to it. And the reason for doing this is to make it possible for the user to explore the raw data and establish an understanding of it. So often raw data tables can be fairly cryptic. Column names are not always like business friendly names, but maybe some cryptic numbers. And you just want to get a feeling of what kind of data you're dealing with. So the Legend Cube component helps you to do that. Then when users are ready to invest a little bit more in their data, Legend has a component that's called Legend Studio, which is a data modeling environment. And this is really the heart of the platform, because what Legend Studio allows users to do is describe the data in business-friendly terms and build data relationships. And you will see that in action later on in our demo. But yeah, so that's super important, especially when we are talking about data deduplication and making data more accessible for users. So the Legend platform also has a component called Legend Query, and that allows you to query data similar to Cube, but the key difference is that you actually use the modeled data to create your queries. So instead of using cryptic dataset names and cryptic column names, you can actually use business-friendly language to build your queries. Again, very self-service drag and drop style, no engineering skills required at all. And that again is very powerful to make data more accessible to everyone, meaning engineers and also non-engineers, and make people more easily understand the data that they are dealing with. So once users created those queries based on the model data, they can decide to share this more broadly and programmatically. And with Legend services, they have a really self-service, easy way to create data services or APIs that can feed this model data into internal application, business intelligence dashboards, or also other developer analytical tools. So but as you can also see here on the diagram, is that we are not only speaking of some pretty nice user-friendly interfaces, but Legend also has a very powerful backend. Specifically, this is our execution engine, which powers all these queries that users run using Legend, and also a software development lifecycle that allows users to efficiently and safely create data models, and also make changes to existing data models. So that was basically Legend at a glance. Hopefully when we dive into the demo later on, you will see how cool it is in action. So we are really looking forward to showing you that. So, but now let's talk about our open sourcing journey. And maybe many of you are wondering, like, why did Goldman Sachs open source this software? And one of the main reasons is that we believe that the Legend platform can really transform how the industry collaborates with each other. Specifically, this is making it possible for everyone to have a seat at the table when it comes to discussing how data is exchanged in the industry. So that means not only different industry participants, such as banks, vendors, or regulators, but also people with different skill sets, meaning business subject matter experts or engineering people. And this is possible because the Legend platform and its user interfaces are really intuitively designed with a lot of collaborative features. And this facilitates communication between all these different parties. And ultimately, that will hopefully result in just some accelerated time to market and quality of industry standards that we can build using the Legend platform. The other point is about data democratization. And I touched upon this already a little bit, but historically, there was kind of a divide between the engineering world and the business world, where both parties had a hard time to understand each other. So with Legend, we really bring those different skill sets together to create something powerful and inclusive, with the hope to create a consistent data vocabulary where everyone speaks about the same things in the same way. And by open sourcing Legend, we hope that we can not only achieve that internally at GS, but industry-wide. And also to that point, we will give you a little bit more details later on. So yeah, and you can imagine when we have a consistent data vocabulary across an industry, that can open up a lot of very helpful use cases. Like one being, for example, a very hot topic right now is sustainable finance, where you can make this type of data more easily accessible and understandable by a broader audience. So now let's talk about how we actually went about open sourcing Legend. As I mentioned, this process was yeah, a little bit challenging being in a financial institution, but it was definitely worth the journey. And so what we did first was to identify like really senior leadership that can sponsor this project so that we can have support and resources to actually make this happen. We also wanted to find an industry partner, which we did find in the Finos organization, where we can hand the code to, and that can also advise us with subject matter expertise on how to run an open source project. So yeah, so once we got this, we needed to actually get the official approvals from various different parties within Goldman Sachs. So that is the different senior leadership, compliance, tech risk, legal, and we had to go to many meetings and present the Legend project and our path to safely open source the code. What we also needed to do is the refactoring of the code and the modularization of the code. So what we mean by refactoring is that we wanted to make sure that the code we actually push out there in the open is most efficient and of course most secure. And what we mean by modularization is that you can imagine, as we're using the Legend platform within GS, there's a lot of Goldman Sachs specific proprietary code and also some features that are only applicable in our own internal environment. So we wanted to separate that out before publishing the code. Then there's also a system that we have inside of Goldman Sachs that's managing all of the open source projects and also the contributors to open source projects. And we needed to make sure that the Legend project is a registered project in that system and that the whole team that is working on the open sourcing of Legend is trained and registered in that system as well. Lastly, the last technical item that we needed to address is that with the Legend project, we wanted to make sure that we not only dump the code out once and then never look at it again, but we wanted to be a client of the Legend product as any other institution would be. So we want to make sure that we can consume the code backend easily. So we needed to define the pipelines and processes to make that happen. And then there are also some more softer topics that need to be addressed when you open source code. That is, you need to create a public website with a lot of documentation, such as user guides and installation guides, rules how to contribute. And then, yeah, you also need to get the word out there that this code is available. So we partnered with the Finos organization and our executive office to write a press release that gets everyone excited about Legend. So personally, what I found the most challenging was yeah, really identifying all these different parties that we need approval from and getting their approval, and all the work that went into refactoring the code, because Legend is a fairly complex product and it's used internally in many different production processes. So you can imagine if you're refactoring like big pieces of code, that may be very risky for our live production processes. So we really needed to be careful and vet every change that we made. But good news is Goldman actually opened an open sourcing office just recently. So to really streamline all these kind of steps that I just walked you through, and really professionalize open sourcing software. And just by partnering with them for the past couple of months, we've really seen a great progress and really professionalizing this project. So we are super happy to have them. Yeah, so that's a little bit about our open sourcing journey. And now I want to give you the chance to ask any questions that you have before we move on to FISPAD. Any questions? I don't actually know if I can see the chat. Something pops up. No?
There's no questions in the chat at the moment. We can always come back.
Exactly, yeah. Then let's come back to that. If you think of anything, just post it in the chat and we will come back to you. Cool, Sophie, your turn.
Great, thanks, Vika. So as we said, what we really wanted to do today is also share how we are seeing Legend transform the financial industry. So before I jump into that, I really want to take you on holiday to a campsite. So you are away with your friends, and I have seen we've got some international people here today, so hopefully this will ring true for some of you. So while on holiday, it's starting to get dark, you're wanting to go to the toilet, and it's not quite at the same place as where your tent is. So you go to your friend and you ask them for the torch. And they look back at you rather confused as to why you're asking for a torch. And then you realize that you're actually on holiday with your US friend. And so as you have said torch, which is what we would say over here in London, they are thinking about a piece of fire attached to a stick. A flame. Now, that doesn't seem like the best idea when you're currently within Canvas in a tent. And it's only when you realize what you've said that the confusion on the face makes sense. So in the UK, a torch for us is just a battery-powered light. That seems very safe. That's what we would all take camping. Hopefully those of you here in London and the UK would agree. But for our friends over in the US, that really doesn't make any sense. And so they're looking at you really confused. And in that moment, the confusion makes sense, right? We're talking about different things using the same word, and equally the reverse way around. We can often be talking about the same thing. So this is exactly what happens in the financial industry. Hopefully that's an example for you that you can relate to if you're less familiar with finance, but we have it all day, every day in finance when we're talking about financial products. Some of us are talking about one thing, but we're calling it two different things. And sometimes we're talking about different things and calling it the same thing. And so we're getting completely confused. So Bika, if you want to move to the next slide. This has been out there in the financial industry for a number of years. And there is a number of industry bodies that really sort of help bring the financial industry together, depending on the products that you're talking about. And one of those industry bodies is ISDA. So they're the International Swaps and Derivatives Association. Obviously, therefore, working within the derivative space of the financial industry. But no need to worry about having any knowledge of that. Hopefully, my example will allow you to understand where we're going with this. And so ISDA have really worked with the industry, bringing people together, trying to standardize those communications and those languages that people are using to make the financial industry more efficient. And so 5 years ago, ISDA released a paper. And they then went on to develop the CDM, or the Common Domain Model. And so this really looks to define our derivatives products. At least that's where it started 5 years ago. And over those 5 years, as I say, I've been involved in these conversations for that entire time. A number of my colleagues across other banks and vendors have also. And in the last few years, we've really started to see sort of regulators getting on board, really trying to bring that financial industry to the next step. Another big part of it, if for those of you who are perhaps interested, is around the new technologies that are coming out around blockchain. So in order for any of that to work, we need to be speaking a standard language again. So really the CDM is sort of the bedrock to that as well. So as I say, for the last 5 years, the industry have been doing this, ISDA being the industry body that sort of spearheaded it, but there are now other industry bodies coming on board with ISDA. So there's ISLA for SEC lending and the ICMA as well for sort of repos and bonds. And Regnosis, that you can see on the right-hand side of this slide, are the fintech that actually built the system that holds the CDM. And so that is Rosetta. If you're interested, you can go and sort of have a look at that as well. But the difference with this was very much within ISDA's realm, and obviously Regnosis had built that system and it wasn't necessarily open source. So although the conversations were happening across the industry, the actual model was still not officially open source. And so this is sort of where Legend comes in, and we partnered with ISDA, got their agreement that as we wanted to open source Legend, we could really use Legend to help building this common domain model, or the CDM. So if we move on to the next slide. Last year, as we took the journey to open sourcing Legend, we really wanted to demonstrate to the industry the power of Legend prior to open sourcing it, because it was all well and good us getting the software out there, but if no one was going to use it, it wasn't really going to help us or the industry. And we also wanted to be able to get some feedback on it. It was the first time that it was going to be going to eyes beyond Goldman Sachs, and so it was really helpful to get feedback on it as well. So we ran some pilots for 6 to 8 months last year. Very challenging in some respects as we sort of started the process as we hit the pandemic, but luckily it didn't have too much. It delayed us by a little bit perhaps, but actually, given we're talking about collaboration in an industry that is international anyway, actually having everyone working from home in virtual worlds didn't really make a huge difference. The main impact was just sort of people getting used to that before we kickstarted the pilots, as I mentioned. So we started a little bit later than we'd hoped, but other than that, not much impact from the pandemic, luckily. And so we started 2 pilots. For those of you who are familiar with the financial industries, we used FX options and commodities. For those of you who are less familiar, FX is foreign exchange. So sort of just like if you were to go down to the Bureau de Change and change up your holiday money. And then commodities, looking at really trading those real handhold ability. So if you wanted to go and trade some gold, or you wanted to go and trade some gas and power, we're talking about those sorts of things on the commodities side. And so we set up these 2 pilots to really go and look at what was available in the CDM. So for FX options, there was a limited amount of code already in that model. And so the group went and had a look at that and made some changes. And we were able to deliver 1 code change out of that specific pilot. And then the commodity side, it was actually an asset class that the CDM hadn't looked at all. So there was no code covering commodities in the CDM when we started. And by the end of those pilots in about September, October last year, we were able to push the code into the ISDA version to give the first representation of commodities in the industry model. So huge strides forwards. It's worth saying that sort of up to that point, we had only been looking, and hopefully you can probably already hear as I've been speaking, we'd got 4 asset classes in 5 years. We managed to do 1 asset class in 6 months. So that's sort of what we're talking about in terms of how Legend has really helped bring the industry together, drive that collaboration and those conversations, and reach agreement much faster. When we took these back to the ISDA governance group in order sort of for that code to be published into the industry standard, often over the years before, it would take 5 or 6 iterations of conversations with the sort of the leading people who were governing the code. And once we were using Legend, being able to get a lot more eyes on the code, being able to use business and engineers together, we were able to get code agreed through 1 or 2 iterations. So we were definitely speeding up that ability. And in some respects, that's down to improving the content by reaching so many more people and getting that diversity of thought across the industry. We were also, through Finos, able to engage with more. So ISDA and the industry bodies have members that are generally those bigger banks within the industry. Through Finos, we were able to actually get some of our clients on board as well. So we were really getting that breadth across the industry and making sure that we were covering some of those nuanced cases that you might think about when you were building products. So it was a great success coming out of those pilots. As I mentioned, we had 2 code releases back into an industry standard within 6 months, which was incredible when we set out. I sort of, in my mind, set it as a goal for us to reach, but never quite believed we'd get there. But yeah, by September, October last year, we actually managed to get 2. So it definitely blew my mind. One other piece I just wanted to mention, and Bika touched on it a little bit earlier as well. During the pilot sessions, we did have a look at ESG, so environmental, social and governance, and a little bit around the sustainable finance, carbon credits and climate change. Last year, though, it was felt that it was a little bit too early. So sort of the rules that were coming out, the changes that were needed, people were still trying to work that out in-house for themselves, and they weren't quite ready to sort of go and collaborate in the industry. So we actually didn't run a pilot on that topic last year, but we are now running something this year through a broader Finos project, which I'll talk a little bit more about later. So it's just great to see, obviously the CDM is one topic as such, or one model that exists in the industry that we can help drive, but we're really looking at other places across finance that we can really help drive, where standard data models, standard communication, standard language would really help to sort of bring the efficiency to the industry. If we move on to the next slide. So just a little bit to go over what we've seen in terms of engagement. So far, we've had 4 banks install Legend on-prem, which is huge. We've also seen one of our clients also take it, and so they're looking at sort of how they can use it for themselves internally, and also in some respects how they could go and use that to sort of connect to the CDM as an example, to help their communication across the industry. We've had 400 issues raised, 220 GitHub stars, and 170 users who are sort of looking at Legend out there in the open source. I think that was, and I'm sure Bika would say the same, it's gone beyond our expectations. We did set ourselves some KPIs, but they were never in those regions when we got started. And so it's really great to see. And I think what's been most exciting for us being part of the project is just the breadth of people that we're being able to speak to. So in a lot of the financial industry, you often come across the same people in a lot of this stuff, but going through Finos, branching out, has just seen us be able to reach so many more people. So as I mentioned just before, we're now looking at ESG in a slightly different project within Finos, and that is the financial object SIG, which you can see on the bottom right-hand side of this screen. So that was a project that Finos had been running for a couple of years. It kind of died down towards the end of last year, and on the back of the success of Legend, they actually asked if we would run that project for them. So in February this year, I took on the lead for the financial objects, and we got that also upgraded to a special interest group in April through the Finos board, just to allow us to put a lot more projects out there to really see the breadth of what we can do in terms of data standards across the financial industry. So sort of Legend now has its grounding within the open source community. People can go and obviously develop Legend itself as the platform. And then we've also got it being used on the other hand to actually drive and build industry standards. So it's kind of got 2 prongs going on now for itself. I mentioned we had 2 approved changes go back into the CDM. We've had another one since those pilots. And so that continues with the work, and Istra are super happy for us to continue with that, and are really grateful for all the effort that's going on and sort of the people we can meet and move forward. So that's a little bit of covering where we've got to so far. Hopefully this will continue in the trajectories that they are. If you're interested, do feel free to reach out to Bika or I, and we can definitely get you connected depending on which branch you're interested in. And so finally, I'm not going to touch on this slide too much because we'll jump into a demo to really get you to see it. But you can see from some of these pictures how easy the UI is. Worth saying, my background in finance, I spent the first 6 years within operations, so supporting our businesses in trading. So really not an engineer by trade in that sense, but really from the business side. And over the last 4 years, getting involved in building our data models, understanding and really driving how we define our products internally and now externally in the industry as well. Legend is just a game changer because I can now write code using a really simple UI, drag and drop. And as I do it, I get to see the code in the background. And so it's teaching me to code alongside. And so I'm hoping over the next few years that I will improve in my coding as well using this. But it just goes to show sort of bringing together that engineer and business side and what that does for sort of driving conversation. So let's jump over into a demo of Legend, and this is where we want your help. So please do chime in. Feel free to unmute yourself. If we have lots of people talking at the same time, that's absolutely fine. We'll try and hear you as we go. So what we want to do is actually using Legend is build a model, and we're going to build a model that defines a person. So think really simply, what pieces of information, if you think about a person, may you want to know about them? Let's say if you were in HR or whatever other scenario you want to be, we can add whatever attributes we want. But if you think about a person, what information do you need to know about them? So feel free to unmute yourself, throw a few ideas. We're not going to go crazy. We'll just build a simple one for now. And then we'll show you how to sort of use Legend in the process.
Already started by creating a person class, which is just basically the business concept that Fee just described to you. So maybe I get started to break the ice. I think a person should have a last name. What do other people think?
Yeah, so we've had name. We've also had an ID, so some kind of identification for that person.
Yeah, let's do that. Just an ID. Yep, that makes sense.
We've had someone suggest age. And
Yep.
interestingly, for age, you'll see on the right-hand side in the blue boxes, currently everything says string. What would you want age to be in the data type? We'll go for number.
Yep,
Yeah,
I agree. And then what I would also say for ID, I leave it as string because maybe an ID can also contain letters and not only numbers, but we could define ID as only having numbers or being an integer or a float as well.
We've also got date of birth as a suggestion, Bika.
Date of birth, that's awesome.
And contact details.
Date of birth. So date of birth, we actually use the data type. Let's call it date. So that was contact?
Yeah, contact details, so emails or phone numbers. But
contact details.
What you could do actually, Bika, is here, we could have contact details as an attribute and perhaps we create another class which holds the extra information. That
was just what crossed my mind as well. Awesome, so contacts. So what we can do here is now more precisely describe what contact details can be. So like
we had
email
phone
address,
number and email.
Yeah, perfect. Phone number.
You'll want to add another D.
Oops, yeah, I just noticed. Thank you. All right, and then phone number is probably a number, and email address a string.
Yep.
And as you can see here, like I could make a phone number optional, or I can say people can actually have many phone numbers. So this is also the cardinality that you could describe here as well. But awesome. So let's go back to our person class, and for contact details, I don't want to have a string. I actually want to link it to my contact class that we just built.
And the other one we've got, just for ease to get going, is gender. I know that was a good one for us because we can use the enumeration.
Yep. So gender. So gender, as we mentioned, let's actually create something that we call enumeration for this. So to basically define the values that can be assigned to the gender property. So here, like for demo simplistic purposes, let me just create female, male, and other, right? So that defines basically the scope of gender values that are valid. Awesome. So I think that we have a good person model. The only other thing I would like to add to our model is something that we call constraint. So here we can specify even more what we allow the values to be associated with a specific attribute. So maybe it doesn't make the most sense, but let's say we want to define what a first name has to start with. So here I just type in a little code snippet, this, oops, apologies, first name. And you can see here while I type this that Legend actually compiles the code for me and lets me know if I type in something wrong. So, but the error message disappeared, and let's just double check if it compiles. Yep, compiles. And yeah, I specified a constraint on my attribute first name here.
Just back
Awesome.
on topics, I think you need to map gender to the enumeration.
Oh, thank you for reminding me.
Awesome. But I have one other thing with this. What I would actually do in terms of someone's name, and I'm playing devil's advocate, this isn't necessarily truly me, but actually what I would want to know is where you've said last name and first name, I'd prefer to use given name and family name.
I understand. So let's create another model that would represent your view of the person world, or not another model, another class. So let's call it new person. So, and as you said, we want to have a family name, which is a string, and a given name. Awesome. So I actually think, B, that your model is better than mine. So maybe let's add a little bit of information to yours so that people that look at this also know that this is our authoritative model. So what we can do here is we can actually define some metadata, additional metadata, such as here we can say this is our authoritative model. And then for text, maybe we add also a description. So when I go to your person class back, I can actually just, to make it easier for me, just pull in this and say, this is the authoritative model. So you can see here how it's being added in this little visualization here. And I also want to add the description so that people know what we are actually looking at. So this is this representation of a person model. Cool. So before we dive into the next step, like one quick thing we wanted to show you as well is the visualization, which has been, like, Fee, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think really transformative in your working groups, right?
Yeah,
So,
absolutely. This was one of the biggest ways that we were able to get the industry to agree on models, because when we were talking about earlier around sort of the engineers versus the business people, the business people being able to visualize something, as you can see in front of you now, if you can imagine trying to describe really complex financial products, when you can really see how each of the pieces you're talking about are related, people can get to it really quickly, and you can equally move things around while you're here. So if someone has a better suggestion or another idea, you can play around with it and see what happens. And so sort of as you've perhaps got more complex relationships between attributes, you'll get a lot more of a diagram here. And you can start to see as you move things around what happens and what impact it has. So it was really, really powerful for us in the industry, or continues to be.
yes, and then what you can also do when everyone is looking at the diagram and you agree on like a change that you would like to make to the person class here, is you can actually just double click and decide to add another attribute. For example, I want to also have a middle name as an attribute. And you can do that directly in here, and the changes go live in our diagram. Cool. So now we have this perfect situation where we have two different representations of a person, similar to the torch example that we brought up at the beginning. And Fee and I, we agreed now that we want to define a person with a family name and given name. So when we want to speak or like exchange data with each other, we want to use the same terminology. But I wouldn't necessarily have to make changes in the way that I describe a person in my environment. So let us show you how this would actually work. So for this, we can actually create a mapping between the new person class and the old person class that all of us worked on together. So the new person is the one that everything should map to, and the source is our original person class. So now you can see here, this popped up, and I can now define that family name is last name in our person class, and a given name is actually a combination of a first name and a middle name. So let us make this a little bit more pretty. Okay, let us see. Yep, compiled. Great. And now let's see how this looks like. So we want to use this to chip. And now you can see here that Legend generates some test data for us that necessarily doesn't make sense. But let's see what happens. And as we expect, Legend actually returns a defect on the source, which is our old person class, because when you remember a little bit earlier, we defined that a first name has to start with a B. And in the test data, that's not the case. So let us actually put in some data that makes a little bit more sense. Oops. Okay, so maybe my name, first name. Okay, like I don't change all of this for now. And then my middle name is Marie. And let's see what happens then. So the defect resolved, and we can see here that in the source, we entered last name Nauke, middle name Marie, first name Bika, and it was successfully mapped to the way that we want to describe a person going forward as family name Nauke and given name Bika Marie. So that's of course a very simplified example, but yeah, we think it really shows a little bit the gist behind the tool. Do you have anything to add?
No, but there are a couple of questions that have come through. One of them being, which I know you'll love to speak about because it's something we've been working on more recently, is does this also create a relational database?
So it doesn't create a relational database. You can actually create an H2 test database just using the Legend UI, but you can connect this data, your data model, to actual physical data. So that can be, so currently the version that we open source supports Snowflake, and we are working on BigQuery right now. And yeah, so internally we have a whole variety of data sources that we support connecting to. Hope that answered the question.
So I think that's everything we wanted to cover on our piece. We're happy to take other questions. Otherwise, I think there was an extra one. There's a little way back.
While you search this, like I just blend in like our contact details in case you want to contact Fee or myself. Here are our email addresses. And then, of course, always feel free to check out our Legend website and our GitHub repository. Just a brief look for you. So this is our Legend website. It describes what Legend is, and it also links you to our GitHub page and more detailed docs, which is the installation guide and the user guide as well. And this is our GitHub repository, main repository. So always feel free to open up issues here as well and engage in discussion with us.
Another question, and I actually don't know the answer, so Bika will see if you do. Is this an Electron app? The interface looks like VS Code.
We have been inspired by VS Code in the design, but no, I don't believe so.
And then jumping back, question for Sophia. What are the efforts to systematically handle tech debt issues as a large organization?
Oh, yeah, I'm not sure actually. Do you guys have some info on tech debt?
Bika, is that something you can touch on?
Sorry, what was the question?
What are the efforts to systematically handle tech debt issues as a large organization?
Oh, I mean, I know that we have a lot of processes in place to handle tech debt. Like this is mainly driven by our tech risk division. But yeah, I wouldn't know the details of, but it's definitely a large effort that needs to be really properly managed to get this done right. And definitely a huge priority at Goldman.
I think we've covered off all the questions in the chat. So are there any others that people want to unmute themselves and ask?
I can add to that one actually to provide, it's general, it's not just financial industry, general, provide a migration path, because if you have legacy software, you can't just bring on your new shiny thing, because legacy, I love the phrase that only successful software becomes legacy software. And once you reframe it and start thinking from this point, you stop thinking negatively in terms of legacy. You start thinking, okay, that's the thing that works, so I must provide some smooth migration. Do we have any more questions? Feel free to unmute yourself.
Oh, is that a legacy question for me? I think the biggest problem with legacy code is maybe a lack of understanding in the team. Like people who worked on it originally don't work in the team anymore, so there's not a huge amount of knowledge about the legacy code. As to how to resolve it, what we found were like the sort of easiest things to get started when handling legacy code was firstly to try and reduce how much code there was. By, like I mentioned, the static analysis tools. So, deleting code that isn't used, and also getting rid of duplicate code. We had like a lot of classes that have just been copied and pasted into different packages. So reducing the amount of code that you have, and increasing code coverage, I think. So if you just aim to get your unit test coverage up, that's gonna, you're gonna learn about the code, and it's gonna, if you need to make changes on it, it's gonna be easier if you have more line coverage. So those would be the two recommendations that I would say for legacy code.
Okay, I guess we don't have any more questions. So thank you very much. This has been an amazing experience. What's AVP? It's a vice president. It's how financial industry calls seniors. I know it's confusing. Yeah. So thank you all very much. I thoroughly enjoyed both the talks and the demo, and we didn't need to pray to demagogues for everything to work. So that's amazing. That's an amazing application of software craftsmanship. Yeah, it's been a long day. Okay, thank you all.